Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. One woman who became a figure of the French Revolution was Charlotte Corday, who despite being just 24 would commit a shocking assassination of a well-known French leader. She was a woman who came from a modest background, but she believed that Jean Paul Marat was involved in a number of massacres. Marat himself was a well-known journalist and mouthpiece of the revolution, and she would take action against him brutally, stabbing him whilst he was out taking a bath. But the assassination of Marat and the subsequent execution of Charlotte Corday shocked the nation. However, inside of France, her head went on a remarkable journey, and it is considered a relic of the French Revolution. But her head was taken by the sharp blade of the guillotine. So what is the story of the head of Charlotte Corday? Now, Charlotte would throughout her time become a rather radical Girondin. She admired their speeches and their groups when she lived in Caen, and she respected their politics. She thought their movement would save France. However, she then began to plot violent and radical actions. Jean Paul Marat was a member of the Jacobins and had a prominent involvement in the Reign of Terror, the period following the Revolution, in which thousands of people were being executed on the guillotine. Anyone who spoke out against the revolution lost their head. And Charlotte Corday decided to try and kill Marat, as he believed that his journalistic articles were dangerous. She thought Marat was a threat to the Republic and that his death would end violence across France. She also thought that King Louis XVI shouldn't have been executed. But on the 9th of July 1793, Charlotte left her cousin and went to Paris, where she stayed in a hotel. She took with her a kitchen knife with a 6-inch blade, and she planned to assassinate Marat in front of the whole National Convention. But he was suffering from a skin condition, and she therefore had to change her plan. On the 13th of July she went to Marat's home, and she said she knew about an uprising in Caen, but Marat would allow her access to his home, and she went into the bathroom where he was taking a medicinal bath. Marat wrote down the information that Corday gave him, and she then pulled out a knife and stabbed him in the chest. He died rather quickly, and following this Corday was seized and was then brought to trial. She would say in a letter to her father that, "Forgive me, my dear papa, for having disposed of my existence without your permission. I have avenged many innocent victims. I have prevented many other disasters. The people, one day delusioned, will rejoice in being delivered from a tyrant. If I tried to persuade you that I was passing through England, it was because I hoped to keep it incognito. But I recognise the impossibility. I hope you will not be tormented. In any case, I believe that you would have defenders in Caen. I took Gustave Dolciet as a defender. Such an attack allows no defence. It is for the form. Goodbye, my dear papa. Please forget me, or rather rejoice in my faith. The cause is good. I kiss my sister, whom I love with all my heart, as well as all my parents. Do not forget this verse by Corneille. Crime is shame, not the scaffold. It is tomorrow at 8 o'clock that I am judged, this 16 July. But she was interrogated a number of times, and she was then brought to trial, and rather quickly, for the execution of Marat, who she regarded as a monster. She was sentenced to death. Following her sentencing, a portrait of her was commissioned, and 4 days after she killed Jean Paul Marat, she was executed on a guillotine in the Place de Grève. It was said of her execution that, in the evening of the 17th, the execution of Charlotte Corday, the assassin of Marat, took place in the Place de la Révolution. Her undaunted composure in her last moments will serve, perhaps, more than her crime, to transmit her name to posterity. During her interrogation, she astonished her judges and the spectators by her calm, decent and unaffected deportment, and even on the approach of death, she expressed herself with the greatest ease and in terms of pleasantry. She was condemned at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after a trial of 6 hours, to be beheaded at 8 o'clock the same evening on the Place de la Révolution. The scene which her execution presented was magnificently awful. The place was thronged with multitudes, and the most feeling minds were excited to behold the Amazonian courage of this unhappy lady in her last moments. It was with much difficulty that she arrived at the scaffold. The fishwoman and other belongings to the market were almost tearing her to pieces, with oaths and imperfections that were most horrid. The gendarmes and the horse of the Republic prevented this horrid act by galloping up with lifted sabres. Corday ascended the scaffold with intrepidity. She appeared serene and reconciled to death. She pulled off her bonnet and handkerchief herself, but recoiled when the executioner went to bind her legs and said, "Are you so bad as to expose me here?" He answered, "No, it is to bind you." "Do it then," she replied with firmness. The inhuman monster, when showing her head to the people after her execution, slapped her twice on the cheek. This was considered as such an atrocious act that there was a very tribunal who had condemned her to death sentenced her executioner to 12 years' imprisonment in irons. The corpse of Corday was buried in the churchyard of St. Madeleine, near the grave of Louis XVI, she having been executed in the same section with the unfortunate monarch. Following her execution, her remains were interred inside of the Madeleine Cemetery, but the skull of Charlotte Corday would then be unveiled in 1889 after it was dug up and exhumed from the ground. It was held inside a display case and was said to have belonged to Prince Ronald Bonaparte, the great-nephew of Napoleon. He was the president of the Geographical Society in Paris and was obsessed in the skulls of people, especially famous ones. It was said that he acquired the skull from a historian, who had taken it from an elderly relative who was the widow of St. Aubin. He was a flamboyant person who wrote many revolutionary biographies, but he may have taken the skull as a joke and as a conversation piece at parties. It was said that he did own the whole head, and that Charlotte Corday's head was actually preserved in alcohol, and he would surprise dinner guests by showing them this. But then the skull was cleaned of its flesh, and many experts have claimed that the skull had never been buried or exposed to the air, meaning it was prepared following the execution in a lab or workshop. St. Aubin would say he brought the skull, and that it had passed through different owners, but there were several teeth missing from the head of Charlotte Corday, showing that these may have been given away as a gift. Historians said that there were 3 possibilities: that the head had been retained following the execution, and then had been sold following the shocking hearing of the man who slapped the cheeks of Corday after she lost her head. Another idea is that it was removed from the cemetery by a member of the family or a well-known supporter who rescued it on the day of the burial. The other possibility is that the remains of Charlotte Corday were taken to a hospital to be examined, and then from here the skull and her head was kept. The skull was last seen by the public in an exhibition in 1966, and the current whereabouts of it is unknown. A second skull did emerge, and was offered for sale in 2009 as Charlotte Corday's, but it was believed that this was a fake. However, the head of Charlotte Corday throughout the years went on a bizarre journey passing through different hands, but she was just 24 when her head was taken clean off by the guillotine blade. She suffered a terrifying execution, but she was a woman who was not afraid to take action, killing one of France's most prominent politicians and journalists. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.